we're super excited to have you here, and we'd just like to start with a background about yourself and your journey, like through growing up and how you got to where you are.
Oh man, that's such a loaded question. My name is Kalena Bovell. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I have some Latin American roots. My parents are from Panama. And actually, everyone in my entire family was born and raised in Panama. So I am a first generation born in the United States, which I think is pretty cool. Like every immigrant family, my parents came here because they wanted better opportunities for both themselves. But then I have an older brother, so also for my brother and myself, because my parents knew that if they had stayed in Panama, we would not have gotten the same opportunities that I have been able to take advantage of here in the States. So I came to music when I was 9 years old. I actually started singing first. In elementary school, what it was, the choir teacher would go to every classroom and would pull every student out and say, here, sing this note. And she got to my classroom, she pulled me out just to hear sing this pitch, and I could sing the pitch. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like I can do something special. But what's funny is before that, I never had any affinity for music. Like I didn't think I was a talented kid. I just like getting dirty and doing what the boys did. I was a huge tomboy. But then once I started kind of discovering my talent for music, it was, I latched on very quickly. Music was what I wanted to do. And singing was what I wanted to do. And so I thought I was going to be a singer. And my friends and I in elementary school, we actually formed a group. And we wrote like 6 songs. We kind of did our own choreographies. We would go around to every classroom and perform for the students and the teachers. And so I was like singing that this is my life, but then I got into middle school and they put me in a beginning strings class as opposed to the choir class. And as you can imagine, I was not happy about being in a beginning strings class because one, I didn't know anything about the string instrument or the orchestral family. For me, it was singing was my life. That was all I wanted to do. And so I'm sitting in this beginning strings class and very similar to the choir teacher, my strings teacher, whose name was Joe Taylor. Taylor, asks every student what instrument they want to play. And again, I know nothing about strings. So I was just like, sir, I'm going to play the flute. And he was like, what are you, an idiot? Go grab a violin. And it was like, oh, okay, sir, thank you. So I grabbed my violin. And, it was very typical. I'm sure, when you play a string or play an instrument, it takes a couple of weeks before you actually start making sound on the instrument. But the first time we were able to pluck or like put a bow to the string, I just knew that violin was my instrument and classical music was my calling, So as much as I love singing, it's like violin took over its place. And so I was just hardcore about violin 24/7. Like I always practice. My mom used to yell at me to stop practicing. Like I was that kid, because I just started seeing how practicing allowed me to improve. And it was also, I kind of felt like I had to prove something to others because I learned very early on that there were going to be many racial barriers within my journey as a classical musician. I mean, in 6th grade, when one of my colleagues even said, he's like, you're not going to be great because you're not Asian. And it was like, oh, well, then I'm going to prove you wrong. And so that was one of the reasons why I kept practicing as much as I did. But that eventually turned into, no, I'm going to practice because I'm getting better, And then when I got to undergrad, even though I was convinced at first that I was going to be a soloist, I honestly wanted to be like Hillary Hahn, soloing with New York Phil, selling out Carnegie Hall, playing solo recitals, but I kept getting injured. One thing they don't tell you as an instrumentalist is that your body is like an athlete. And if you don't stretch and take care of it, injuries can happen very easily. And so I went into undergrad with tendonitis in basically both of my forearms, also on my left shoulder. And I realized, being a performance major is not in the cards for me. And so therefore I'm going to be an education major. But education for me was never a backup degree. Like education was always a part of my life growing up, because one thing about Latin American families is education is always at the forefront. And so I knew that pretty much when I was a kid, I was either going to be a teacher or a doctor. And so teaching was kind of like, well, this will be a nice way to bridge the gap of playing violin, but then also teaching what I love and am passionate about music to other people. So sophomore year, we had to take a year of instrumental conducting. And so I took the very first course, again, similar to being in that beginning strings class. First couple of weeks, you're not doing anything. You're just learning the patterns. You're learning how to look at a score, how to, transpose and hear what all the parts sound like. And then the first day I get on the podium, And it was just kind of like, what is this art form that I have never known about? Because as a singer, singing was all I wanted to do. And so I was paying more attention to singers, right? And then as a violinist, it was, okay, well, I'm paying attention to Gil Shaham, Hilary Hahn, Sarah Chang. And so I never noticed what an actual conductor did. But then once I started studying conducting, it was kind of like, I need to find out everything about this art form because something about conducting just called to me. I was so curious and I never wanted to stop. I just wanted to keep learning more. So in undergrad, I got to the point where I would go to the orchestra rehearsals with my little score, sitting in the back, didn't know exactly what I was doing, but all I knew was I was supposed to be in rehearsal with a score, right? And I mean, I couldn't stop. And so I remember going to my conducting teacher at the time and I said, look, I want to study conducting in grad school. And he was like, oh, you want to do a master's here? I was like, no, you're not hearing me. I want to go away and do a master's in grad school. But, that's how serious about conducting I had become because it felt very natural to me. It didn't feel like I had to work as hard because on violin, I was so behind. I started playing when I was 11, didn't have my first private lesson until I was 18. So 7 years of being self-taught in public school education, you're always having to play catch up. Whereas when I started conducting, it was, this is brand new. I don't have to play catch up. And so I never had to play catch up as I was continuing on this journey. So that's kind of how I came to conducting. I mean, I knew that if I was going to be successful as a musician, I had to study on the East Coast. And that was mainly because my first violin teacher, at least the person I consider my real violin teacher, he studied with Dorothy DeLay at Juilliard. And I saw that all of his students were going to Aspen, they were going to Meadowmount, they were going to all the music festivals that were either back East or Midwest. Whereas a lot of my colleagues that I saw that were staying in California, no one did anything. It's like no one went to the West Coast to study music. And so I just realized for me, if I'm going to seriously study music, like I have to go to the East Coast. And that's how eventually I went to the Hart School. And I studied with an amazing teacher Edward Cumming, who is my teacher, friend, mentor. Like I owe all of who I am today to this man. And then that eventually led me to this job here in Memphis.
That's so amazing. I was thinking while you were talking, you found this like perfect blend of educator, soloist, musician. Like as a conductor, you now are all of those things.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's like, as a conductor, I think people feel like, oh, as a conductor, you do the one thing, because I've had someone ask me like, was it hard to kind of go from education to conducting? And it's like, no, because as a conductor, you're an educator.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people don't realize.
Yeah. Was it hard going to the East Coast and like making that jump? Or did you just like know that was what you had to do?
That's a good question. It wasn't, so it was difficult from the standpoint of, it was my first time being away from home. So I never had a car in undergrad until like I was 25. So I was a very late undergraduate because I went to community college for 3 years and then eventually transferred to a school called Chapman University. So I think when I started Chapman, I was 23 or 24, right? And my dad would drive 40 miles to Orange County to pick me up, bring me back to LA, and then would drive on a Sunday and do it all over again. So it was kind of like I was used to being away from home because I didn't have that independence of just getting on the freeway and going home. But moving 3,000 miles away, that was a little bit more difficult because I was fully independent. Like if something happened, sure, I could call my parents, but I couldn't go home and get it fixed. But it wasn't as difficult because, as a music student, I'm sure you guys know, you are so immersed in everything that you're studying and everything around you that there really isn't time to kind of notice everything else. So I feel like my transition to grad school was a lot easier compared to my transition to undergrad.
In your bio, it said that you had this like lack of resources that you kind of was why you started private lessons so late. So I just was wondering, what did you feel was like a lack of resources for yourself?
Well, the first thing is like lack of education, and by that, when I said I didn't know anything about the string instrument family, I didn't know anything about orchestras. And so as I started becoming more serious about violin, my parents honestly did not know that the next step for me was private lessons because no one told us. And it's like, if you're going through the public school system, how are you supposed to know those things, right? Because we weren't surrounded, or we didn't have friends whose children took private lessons. My parents also didn't know that I needed a quality instrument. We all kind of thought the instrument that I have in school is fine. So why shell out the money to get something better? And actually, when my parents eventually got me an instrument, I love this instrument. It was a $200 instrument from the Fingerhut catalog. I don't know if you guys remember Fingerhut at all. But honestly, it was amazing firewood. It was not a great instrument, but I remember thinking, because it's my instrument, I was so proud of it, and I loved it. But when I had my first teacher, who ended up being Taylor, who started me in middle school, even he was like, "What is this? Like, this is not a quality instrument." It's like, well, we don't know these things. Also, lack of education when it comes to different summer programs. Like, had we known about the different music programs that we could have gone to during the summer, different conservatories, just different enrichment programs that were available to me. None of these things were known to my family or myself. And actually, by chance, we discovered the Southeast Symphony Association Conservatory, which was down the street around the corner from where we lived. And the only reason my mom and I discovered it is because we were going to the store one Saturday morning, and we happened to look over at the place I was going to high school, and we saw people walking up the stairs with instruments, and we were both like, well, what is this? So we went to inquire, and it was like, oh, there's a conservatory that's been going on in this location for the past 5 years. And so that's what I mean when I say lack of resources. I mean, there were just so many things that we did not know. And even when it comes to lack of finances, private lessons cost money. And it's not that we were a poor family, but we did live paycheck to paycheck. And so if it wasn't kind of deemed a necessity, then we didn't do it.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people hear this, that not only that these things are happening, but also that someone like you was able to do it in spite of that, like transition and still have this flourishing career even though you had these challenges. I think that's really important for people to hear.
I think so. And, I think the biggest thing about me is I've always been determined, like my parents always instilled in my brother and myself is that if we want something, we have to work for it, because no one's going to hand you anything. And even though we never had the financial means or the financial resources, we always found a way to make it work. Like even undergrad was a very expensive school. And I remember at the time, undergrad for me was like 33,000, which seems like nothing now, because I think now the school is at around 60 or 65,000. But I remember having the conversation with my dad, saying, am I going to be the person that breaks the family's back financially? Because, you think about those things, and it's like, yes, I really want to go to music school, but if we can't afford it, then I won't go to music school. And my dad looked at me and he said, your education is an investment. And so never doubt our support for you. And I think that's something I always take with me. It's like, yes, I didn't have a lot of resources, but like my career, my education, it was an investment. And I think people need to look at it that way when they look at all these different opportunities.
Yes, for sure. Also, in your bio, it talked about working 6 jobs. Was that at Chapman or at Hart?
That was at Chapman. So,
That's wow.
let me just make clear. It was never 6 jobs all at the same time, okay. Right? But it was pretty much like Monday through Sunday.
Yeah.
Trying to think if I can recall. So I was working at a frozen yogurt shop. I was teaching in a violin studio. I had private students. I was working as an assistant conductor for OCYSO, which is Orange County Youth Symphony Orchestra. I was the string coach for Prelude Strings. Oh, and I worked at a Waldorf school as the music assistant. So, I mean, it was kind of crazy because, like, let's say Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would be at the Waldorf school and at one end of the freeway, basically. And then I would have to drive to the complete opposite end of the freeway to go teach music lessons. So I lived in my car for 2 years.
Well, especially in that area of California, you would.
Right, exactly.
Just really impressive that you were able to to do all that. And you worked all those jobs so that you could support yourself and also pay for the things you wanted to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I remember this correctly, I was working 6 jobs so that I could afford to buy a plane ticket for grad school auditions. Like that was the main reason, you know what I mean? Because actually, in 2010, I went to my very first conducting workshop, which was called the Conductors Retreat at Madomic, and I completely wiped out my bank account, you know, for paying for the workshop itself plus the plane tickets. And so I came back to California with like $500 to my name, and it was like, okay, well, we have to work so we can replenish this bank account so that we can eventually buy plane tickets. So yeah, I mean, people tend to say the life of a musician is 24/7 grind. And look, I grinded for 2 years. I'm still grinding now, but you know.
It's like, obviously identity is part of like how we relate to the world. Like everything about us informs that and it's a part of us. But then at the same time, like the world often labels us based on our identity. And I'm just wondering, have you thought about this? It's because I feel like with women conductors, women is always before that. It's never just conductor, at least in my experience.
No, I mean, totally. I'm always referenced as a woman conductor. I mean, one question I've gotten before is, what is it like to be a woman conductor? You know, and sometimes I do want to be a smart aleck and be like, well, what's it like to put on pants? Like, what's it like to breathe a breath? You know, like, because sometimes I'm like, no one asks a male conductor, what's it like to be a man conductor? They just are a conductor. So it's not like women conductors are this new phenomenon, you know, or this new anomaly. It's like we just are. We just happen to be women. And so it is something that I think of because it's something that is constantly referenced and brought up. But I mean, in terms of myself as a conductor, I don't see woman first. I just see Kalena Bovell conductor, you know, and hopefully someday soon people will also see the same thing. And I think for me, I also happened to get the question of, you know, you're also the only African-American Hispanic conductor, which I think is pretty cool. You know, but at the same time, it's like, I hope someday people will stop referencing that because I just want them to see my talent as opposed to my skin color or my gender.
I think it's an interesting dilemma that occurs.
Yeah, it's a fine line because it's what makes you special, but it also can be the thing that people just like know you as. So that's a really tricky thing.
Yeah.
No, it is most definitely a tricky thing. But you know, don't get me wrong. It's like I celebrate the fact that I am a woman. You know, like I once had a teacher, won't say who, but I once had a teacher, you know, who asked if I would wear a longer jacket when I conduct, and I was like, why? You know, and his biggest thing was to cover up your behind, and I was like, but I'm a woman and I celebrate my curves. And so I'm going to celebrate my femininity on the podium. And it's not like I was wearing anything skin tight, but you know, it's like I just had a certain type of jacket that didn't cover my butt. And it was like, well, this is just how I look, you know. I cannot help the fact that I work out and I'm curvy. Or, you know, I've also had conversations about my hair. Like you can't tell right now because it's pinned up or pulled back, but you know, I wear my hair naturally curly. And like think Dudamel when Dudamel was much younger, you know, and he had nice little bouncy curls. But I've had issues with people saying, well, you know, your curls are distracting. And it's like, but has anyone gone to Simon Rattle and say, excuse me, sir, when you were in your 20s, your curls were distracting? Probably not. So I think it's interesting that when it comes to women, we are much more on display. And the things that we do say wear tends to get picked apart a little bit more as opposed to our male counterparts. And I think that is something that people need to become more aware of and ask themselves why. But then I also think, what is the definition of conservative in classical music? You know what I mean? Like as an instrumentalist, as a conductor, as a player, just what is the definition of a conservative? Meaning, how would you define that in regards to how someone looks? So someone would say, well, my hair is conservative right now, right? If I were on the podium, whereas I'm just like, my hair is just twisted and in a ponytail. But let's look at the definition of why you consider this conservative. And so again, those are the things to me that needs to be examined and really taken apart so that we as classical music as an organization can continue moving forward.
Yes. Yeah. Because we should just be able to express ourselves how we want to. And that's part of us and our art and all the things.
I mean, this is totally a separate topic, but I have tattoos. you know. And when I have one on my inner bicep. And when I got this one, I remember my grad school teacher was like, oh yeah, that's really nice. You're going to cover that up, right? And I was like, why? It's a reflection of who I am. And so why would it be distracting if me as a person is not distracting on the podium? You know, so yeah, it's all these little things.
Yeah, there's also this pressure, I think. This is something we talked about in one of our first interviews, was like this pressure of having to conform to this masculine type role. So even though anything feminine then looks inappropriate in that masculine role. So even when your hair is curly and down, that's feminine because you're a woman. But so it's really interesting.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really good take and point of view on it.
So we are really interested to hear about your poetry as well. So is that something for you? Like when did that start within your journey of like writing and
that started. I always skip a date. It started when I was 19 or 20. So you cannot tell from looking at me, but I battled depression for 5 years, between the ages of 19 to 24. And so I believe I started writing poetry either towards the end of 19 or early 20, mainly because I kept everything inside. So the way my depression kind of happened, so I was going to Santa Monica College, which is a community college, and I had no friends. You know what I mean? It's like this transition from high school to college is a huge jump. And so having all these friends in high school to not knowing anyone at this community college, I was also taking 2 buses to get to school. So I would wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, hop on a bus, transfer to the next bus, go to school and be there. And I was taking like a full load, which is 15 units. And so there was all of this intrinsic pressure that I was putting on myself. And then all of this external pressure from my classrooms, from my teachers, just trying to stay afloat. And so pretty soon it all just kind of came to a head. And so I woke up one morning and I remember just looking in the mirror and thinking something about me just looks different, like something is off, and that was the start of my depression. And so because at the time my family and I didn't really express emotions that well, I didn't have anyone to talk with. And so I wasn't seeing a therapist yet. And, I wasn't talking to my family. I wasn't really talking to anyone outside of my best friend. And so when I started writing poetry, it was a way for me to say all of the things out on paper that I couldn't say verbally. And I think I wrote this way for the first 2 years of my writing. And then by year 3, I remember thinking, this is really selfish because there are other people out there who are going through the exact same thing. And so why not write for those other people as opposed to writing for yourself? And so now I actually write from the standpoint to this day of being the voices for people who feel as though they weren't allowed to have one. So Dear Soul, which is the first book, was written over that 5-year period. And it honestly just chronicles my journey of, going through depression, everything that I was encompassing, whether it was heartbreak, losing a family member, just insecurities, to coming out of it. And so, yeah, that's how that book was born.
I read some of your poems last night, and they were
cool.
They're just I that was me that bought your book. Yeah, and I mean they're just so powerful, and you can through your words, and you can feel some of your pain. And as sad as that is, you're right. It's so important that other people know that they're not alone in that either, and that it is kind of something. Maybe someone who's been through what you've been through, it would be kind of natural at some point in your life to have to process that.
Exactly. And honestly, whenever someone reads a poem, I would hope, rather than them saying, oh yeah, this is great, I really hope they would say, I know exactly what that feels like. I have been there. And then them knowing it's okay because I'm going to come out of this.
Actually, I'm really curious if how you found writing poetry enhanced your life as a conductor.
Well, that's a good question. I don't know, actually. I don't know if the two have overlapped yet. But I know that most of my poems do have a rhythm to them. There is an underlying rhythm and balance and just structure to them, which I think definitely plays into my conducting, because when you study a score, even when you practice music, there is a structure, there are phrase groupings, there are all of these different things that you're discovering from the music. And I know that my violin teacher, Bill, would always tell his students to try to make a story in whatever piece we were working on. But that's something I don't do with my music. And I've tried, but for some reason, I think because it's not my own, it's hard to associate a story with it. Whereas I took composition lessons for a semester in grad school, and I had the hardest time. And my teacher was like, okay, for some reason, this is just not clicking with you, And then he discovered I wrote poetry. He was like, all right, this is how we're going to approach this. He's like, bring in a poem. And so I brought in a poem. He's like, all right, I want you to try and put music to this. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, this makes sense. Like, so I don't know that the two, again, influence each other, but I know that just being a creative, poetry for me is just another form of outlet. It's like once the pandemic started last March, like most people, I didn't want to do anything. I wasn't conducting, wasn't creating, wasn't studying. I was like, nope, I'm just going to sit on the couch for the next 3 months and that's fine. But then all of a sudden I started seeing like words. So the way I write, usually it's like I start seeing stanzas and lines that honestly just kind of go through my head. And I have to write them down very quickly because if I don't, then I lose them. But, I just started seeing all these words and phrases and it was like, okay, there's something here. And I noticed that my creative process was just starting again. So poetry for me is just another form of creation that, I may not be able to do with conducting or even violin.
Yeah, actually that video on your website where you recite a poem and then you go into conducting, that was actually really cool to see you do those things right next to one another. So
thank you. Yeah, I am so proud of that video. That is the Conductor Cam collaboration with Rob McClure, who is just a sweetheart. But no, I'm so proud of that video. And I say this all the time, even if my career, let's say, lasts for 3 years, that's totally fine because that video is the most important thing I will have ever done in my career.
Can you explain a little bit about why you feel that's the most important thing?
Because I feel like it touches, it brings to light so many of the issues that had been hidden for so long in both classical music, in the arts, honestly, in society, And the way that collaboration started was, it was right at the height of George Floyd's murder. And I had gotten so many emails, I hate to say this, from white males, Asian males, just from males. And, oh, hey, we'd love to have you on our board. Or, hey, we'd love to. And it's just like, okay, this is great, but where were you like, I don't know, a year ago? Like, why are you doing this now? And we all know why they were doing this now. Like, let's just be honest, So I got this email from Rob and I was just kind of like, oh God, here's another like guilty white male, But there was something very sincere about his email. So I responded and I said, look, I'm getting a lot of these emails. Why are you different? And he responded and I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, this guy's different. And so we had this conversation. It was a lovely, like 2-hour conversation, and Rob was really adamant about the fact that I am a white male with this platform. And I want to use my platform to bring visibility to marginalized voices. And so when I look at that beyond the conductor cam collaboration, it's important because it wasn't just his thing. It was our thing together. 2 of my friends are in the video at the end. One's playing flute, the other's playing violin, and so it was like this really massive communal collaboration. And I'm just really proud of that. And, it's like in the video, I'm in black and white when you first see me. And then I eventually come into color. And Rob and I had talked about that. And then when he kind of sent me the final draft, I was like, what happened to the, my coming into color? And he's like, oh, and that's just really difficult to do. And I was just like, but that'll make the moment. And so he went back and he's like, oh, I think I did it. And he did it. And it was just like, this is what I mean, so that's why it's super important to me, because it was a true collaboration. And it was, someone who honestly is sincere, who is seriously passing the baton to someone who has been hidden in society for a long time.
Wow, yeah. We will definitely make sure to link that video into this interview when we post it out so people can see that.
Thank you. Yeah, and then, being able to recite my poem, Tethered Voices. I mean, I wrote that half an hour, and I talk about the creativity that was coming, after George Floyd's murder, I was angry, as many people were angry. And usually for me, when I don't know how to express myself verbally, I write a poem. And, that was the poem that came out of it. So yeah, that's why I'm also proud of that video, because you are able to see the many facets of just my personality.
So I'm just curious, like, how your community within music has evolved or changed.
Oh, it's changed so much. So I get laughed at all the time, mainly because it's so shocking to people. It's like, I'm a classical musician, right? But like, if you ride in my car, you will not be listening to classical with me. I bump like metal, screamo, alternative death metal, like all of that lovely stuff, like black metal especially. Like anything that I can basically give myself whiplash to, it's like, that's what I'm about. And so I feel like over the years, my taste in music, but then also my music community has evolved, because I have started discovering all these different genres of music, which I definitely think have helped to influence what I do on the podium. So it's interesting because growing up, I started listening to like No Doubt and Blink-182 and Green Day in sixth grade, but imagine what it was like for me, the Black girl, to be listening to what was classified as white people's music. And I remember my dad actually saying, how can you listen to this white people's music? Like, this is white people's music. Because, we were supposed to listen to, we meaning people of color, were supposed to listen to rap and R&B. And that's not what called to me. But I feel as though when I started really opening my eyes and ears to these different genres, that started influencing just the type of music and the type of people that in community that I was associating myself with. So at first it was, the community of rap and R&B, like Alicia Keys and Sade. But again, Green Day, No Doubt, which then became Muse, which, eventually became X, Y, and Z. And so it just has really expanded my horizons. And I felt like I have such a vast community for music, because there's just so many things that I love.
So then with classical music, did that feel kind of stuffy to you? I mean, if you had kind of had this like large range of music that you liked, and now you're like studying classical music, and it tends to be kind of like a more, stuffy kind of environment, I guess. Did you feel that way?
No, I know the classical music is viewed as being elitist or stuffy, as you had mentioned, but no, I've never felt that way. Because I just kind of look at it as, what is this composer trying to say? And how in the experiences that I bring to the table, can I bring that to life? And I'll tell you, there's sometimes in rehearsals where even with my kids, where I'm like, look, this should be head banging music. Like, this is Brahms, it's like Brahms was a rock star. People didn't realize that. And it's like, you have to play this in a way where it's like you're giving yourself whiplash. So, I mean, there are many times on the podium where I make references to like rock and metal. And again, people laugh and they're just like, how? But it's like, why not?
I bet they love that.
Totally. I mean,
Yeah.
I love it. Like, it's just so different and unique. And I think it adds to just me as a person. I'm different and unique, but I own my authenticity. And I feel like those authenticities are the things that add to the music that I make with other musicians sitting in front of me. But I also feel like, because I didn't grow up listening to classical music, it's like doing a pop show for me is simple, because I probably listened to that band, on repeat many times. Whereas I've had friends who either only listen to classical and then they do the pop shows, and it's like, okay, I don't know what's going on. So no, but that's why I strongly feel, again, it's just so important to be human. It's just so important to expose yourself to so many different things and not just the one.
Yes. I think that one of the last things we want to talk about is like your experience in Memphis and getting that job and what that was like. And I know you're also conductor of the youth orchestra too. And I'm just curious to hear about your experiences.
Getting Memphis was honestly a dream come true. I'll like take you through just the day really quickly. Like, coming to Memphis for the audition process, I was so super nervous, because one, it's like, you just never know how an audition is going to go, because every single one of them is different. And I truly believe that going on an audition is like going on a date. And so I was in Memphis back in 2016, assisting their former music director, Mayan Chen, for her final Masterwork concert. And so I got to know a little bit of the organization and some people within it. And so coming back in 2019 and seeing some of those same faces and those people remembering me, it's like, I remember walking around the corner and they're like, oh my God, how are you doing? And I was like, wow, you guys actually remember who I am? Like, Because I kind of just thought I was a blip, and then it was like, okay, she's gone, you know. So coming back, it was like, okay, this already feels like family. This already feels like home. The musicians were so super nice and supportive. I had like a really silly moment during the audition itself. So it was in the movement of the Adagietto from Mahler 5. And I accidentally hit my stand or hit my hand on the stand. And I was like, ow. And then my music fell and my baton fell. And I was like, you know what? I was like, how about we just do this again? I'll not hurt myself, and then it'll be great, like, cool. And we all laughed together, you know, and it was just like, okay, we're all having this human moment, which is really cool, you know. But the next day I flew back home to Connecticut, and I was standing at the airport, and I missed a call from Bob Moody, my music director. And I was like, oh, why is Bob calling? It's interesting. So I get in my Uber, go home, and I just kind of like fell on the couch when I got home because I was so tired, you know. And so I called Bob back, and we were doing some small chat, and he was like, how are you feeling? I was like, I am exhausted. You know, I was like, how are you feeling? And he was like, oh, this is the part I love. I was like, oh yeah, what was that? And he was like, well, you know, the board and I, we all met this morning, and it was a unanimous decision. We are offering you the job. And I got really quiet for about 30 seconds, and I just started sobbing. You know, I mean, it was just like tears were flowing, and it was just ugly cry. And Bob was like, these are happy tears. I was like, they're really happy. Just give me a moment. But, you know, in that moment for me, it was kind of like all of the sacrifices, all of the hard work, like everything that I had done, my parents had done, all of the people who had gotten me to this moment, you know, it wasn't in vain, you know. So it was almost like I had won, but I knew I still had so much more work to do. But, you know, coming to Memphis has been amazing. You know, I always tell people this has been the most amazing first job, you know, because the organization is really supportive. Memphis does feel like home, and it felt like home the day I moved here. I love my colleagues, I love these musicians, and I love the community that I get to meet pre-pandemic, of course. But you know, one of the things we did were these ORF education concerts where we would go to 13 different school sites and have a side-by-side concert with kids in grades K through 5. And it's like sometimes for the children, they've never played alongside an orchestra before. They never heard a live orchestra before. For the parents, it's their first concert experience, you know. And then for the little kids who look like me, for them, they're seeing representation for the first time in their lives. And all of a sudden, it's like they now realize they can do exactly what I'm doing because they're seeing someone who looks like them doing what I'm doing. So Memphis has been amazing. And with the Youth Symphony, it's a very difficult balance, mainly because, you know, the Memphis schedule, again, pre-pandemic, was very busy. And then trying to basically also add in the Youth Symphony on top of that. Sometimes I would be double booked on weekends, which, you know, it's fine, but I love my kids. I love working with those students. And it's been such a rewarding experience over the past 2 years.
That's so cool. At least from what you're saying, it sounds like it was just the perfect fit and you're able to do exactly what you had been working on.
And I think what's funny is like, I actually went to school and am doing everything I went to school for. You know, like not many people can say that, you know, that is the dream, you know. And like what's cool about Memphis, you know, representation for me is really huge, because as we talked about before this actual call, a lot of us didn't see representation, whether it being in women teachers or mentors or just people who looked like us. Mm-hmm. And so one of my students who has graduated, he's now a freshman in college. Remember, he sent me a private message via Instagram, and he's like, you know, Miss B, I remember coming to Youth Symphony that first day and seeing a conductor who looked like me. And he thought, yep, this is my conductor. This is going to work. And that's something I always like hold very dear to my heart, because it's so important for me that my students have the opportunities that I never had, which is why education is so important to me. And why I always say representation matters, because people can't be who they can't see.
And that's basically why we are interviewing women, because we know this, and we want more people our age and younger to see what is actually happening, what is actually possible, what people are actually doing right now, because it's happening. We just don't always know about it. So
exactly.
We just wanted to know if you had any words of wisdom or advice that you would like to give our listeners.
Ooh, yeah, totally. You know, like be kind to yourself, and know that perfection does not exist. don't strive for perfectionism, just strive to be better than you were the last time. So I know for me, whenever I get on the podium, I always try to be better than I was the last time I was on the podium. And then be sure to live life, which might be difficult because pandemic, but by that, I mean, don't just spend all your time either studying or practicing or feeling as though you need to spend 8 to 10 hours doing X, Y, or Z. Go out and live life, go to the park, go to a museum, go watch a movie, rent something on Netflix or Redbox, because those experiences is what's going to add to what you do in your professional and personal career. And so I wish someone would have told me that in grad school, because that's something that I'm definitely learning now.
You basically just described what I feel like as a senior in college, like what I've struggled to do for 4 years.
Well, I mean, like in grad school though, I thought, well, my teacher kind of said, yeah, I expect you to be, basically sit on your hands 24/7 and study. And you're like, okay, because what your teacher says goes, right? But man, now I wish I'd have gone out, after seeing a concert with my friends so that, so I can recall those experiences. Or I wish I'd have gone to those different art shows or, just different things, because now that I'm doing them, again, pandemic, as safely as we all can. But at the same time, it's like there isn't a whole lot of time to do them right now because I have a ton of music to learn, which I'm grateful for. But I feel like it's so much more important to be a human than to be perfect at your one skill.
Yes.
Because being a human adds to your skill.
Mm-hmm.
Well, being a normal human again will be something we're all going to look forward to when that happens again.
Facts. That is very true.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.
Yeah,
and
amazing.
I learned so much, and I'm so excited for this to be visible for everyone. I don't know. This was great.
This was great.
Oh, you're most welcome. And like, seriously, thank you both for having me. Like this was just a really cool conversation, which I just love. I just love having conversations.
And they need to be had. So that's why we're so passionate about this. And yeah, it's really exciting for us. And especially like, I don't know, for me personally, feeling like maybe I can give back a little bit to the women and just musicians in general coming up, just to see more role models like this. So.
Well, and I think that's fantastic. And I think you both touched on it. It's as I like to say, this life is bigger than we are, right? Because we wouldn't be where we are without the help of those people who guided us along the way. And I strongly believe that it's our duty to help those who are up and coming to get to where they want to be. So the fact that you two are doing this is fantastic.
Thank you.